everyone, my name is Leah Walcott, and today I'm going to be talking about my professional development plan and self-assessment summary. So let's get into it. I chose Dr. Neff's self-compassion scale, and it's basically a self-report questionnaire that measures an individual's level of self-compassion, specifically how they treat themselves during times of difficulty. I specifically chose this scale because I've noticed throughout my life, but especially now, being a social work student, I have a hard time extending grace to myself, especially in difficult circumstances, whether it's my fault or not. And this is something that, although it's embarrassing to admit, is a contingency point for me to work on. So I'm putting this out there in hopes that I now have an established plan that I'm going to be sharing with you guys, to kind of stick to actually being the professional that I want to be. Miller's 2018 article argues that self-care is an ethical obligation as a professional, and I definitely agree with that. But agreeing with that is just not enough. It's also taking a look at yourself and examining where you need to self-correct, and this is one of them for me. So thanks for joining me on this journey. What I really do like about this self-compassion scale is that it measures 6 core components. So it measures self-kindness and self-judgment, common humanity and isolation, and then mindfulness and over-identification. So with my results, I did not find this as a surprise, but my self-compassion score is an overall low. To give you some perspective, the average is a 3.0. So your lows are going to be a 1.0 to 2.5, your mediums are going to be 2.5 to 3.5, and your high self-compassion is going to be a 3.5 to a 5.0. But what did actually came up for me was a strong mindfulness, and that's at a 4.50. Which is pretty good because it's a skill that I've actually actively been working on. So the fact that that came up in my results was really promising that I'm going in the right direction in terms of that. But there are definitely some things to work on. I have high self-judgment. I tend to isolate during stressful times, and I do, with boundaries, need to establish them, as, I take on a lot of other people's emotions, and that gives me a vulnerability to burnout, secondary trauma, and compassion fatigue. So with these results, I'm going to come up with a professional plan and walk you guys through what that looks like for me. So again, key insights for my self-assessment: I am strong in mindfulness, I have a motivation for growth, and I have an insight to see my stressful patterns and how that's not good for me. So that's good, that's a place to start. And my challenge is reiterating that again. I have high self-criticism. I have a feelings of isolation under stress, very high. I have the tendency to absorb other people's energy, also very high at 3.50. And I have low self-kindness. So evaluating my current skills and opportunities, I am a 6-year veteran. And so understanding military culture is definitely going to help me with my aspirations in the future, as I do want to work with military personnel with their PTSD and trauma, in a clinical setting preferably. And so understanding that I have that background with deployment stress, reintegration into civilian life, just moral injury, all of these things that come with military service, when working with the military population, kind of gives me that natural credibility. So building upon that, I also volunteer as a crisis counselor on the crisis text line, and this is part of my internship as a pod student. Long story short, if you are a pod student, you're part of a 9 to 10 person group that works with undergraduate students, and part of our opportunity is that we get to work on the crisis text line. So what that looks like for me is I go through crisis intervention. I've done training for de-escalation, suicide prevention, and real-time problem solving. So this kind of just adds to the skills that I've learned within the military that echo that same thing. And what I found that was really interesting in our training course, a lot of the course information is based off of works of Roberts, which we also read about, which is really cool. And for my field placement, I work in the Career and Professional Development Office. So what that looks like for me is I coach the undergrads as far as going through their resumes, cover letters, personal statements, applying to higher education, or even just going straight into the workforce, depending on what their major is, what their background is, and what they're interested in. If they don't know, that is the perfect time to come into our office and figure it out. So with that being said, understanding how mindfulness kind of plays into each of these roles, I understand that I have a strong professional readiness, but I need to intentionally strengthen the emotional self-support of myself to sustain a long-term clinical career, especially working with veterans. So I kind of briefly touched on this, but my career goals is to become a licensed LCSW. I specifically would like to work with military personnel with their mental health. That includes their past trauma, PTSD, any moral injuries that they've gotten from, the military setting. I would like to work at the VA if possible, but any vet centers, military hospitals, veteran-focused nonprofits, I'm all for it. But before we even get into that part of it, we also need to just examine the short-term goals, because that's where I am right now. So without getting too overwhelmed with the future, which we'll get into in a second, I want to develop as a future clinical social worker. So obviously that entails me right now getting the MSW degree, which I'm working on, and successfully completing my field placement, not just like checking off things off the box, but actually making sure that I develop in my skills of intervention, assessment, documentation, coming up with my own ways of communication that's true to myself, but also relies, according to my ethics. So, in general, just reducing burnout while balancing school and work is something that I also prioritize as a short-term goal. And this is just what it looks like for me. Getting into the required skills, knowledge, experience, licenses, and resources that I'm going to need in order to get there. That guy in the right-hand corner that looks like he's losing his mind, that's me. So to become an LCSW, I obviously need the MSW degree from an accredited CSWC program, which check we are in. Postgraduate supervision experience, clinical hours, that's usually around 3,000 hours, which is a lot of hours. I believe that's more than 2 years or just about 2 years. Passing the ASWB clinical exam, obviously, and this is after you get those clinical hours, and then applying for the licensure in New York State. The knowledge areas that I'm needed is the trauma-informed clinical experience. Obviously, working with veterans, that is just a part of the job. And so military mental health and systems of care is just generally something that I need to understand from a professional clinical perspective. Evidence-based treatments for veterans is definitely something that I need to hone in on. I have actually been a part of some of these things like CBT and EMDR, being involved in group therapy with veterans in particular. So understanding how to facilitate programs like that and also knowing what these programs are is going to be helpful for me. Suicide risk assessment definitely comes with the territory, unfortunately. And with my personal experience is hard, but safety planning and not shying away from topics that are difficult are definitely going to be something that I prioritize because it's needed for the clientele that I'm going to be serving. And what's also needed is cultural humility. Knowing that I'm going to be working with a diverse population of military veterans, though they're part of the 1% of the population, we come from near and far. And so understanding and brushing up on, my ethics, my cultural humility, cultural competency is definitely going to help me assist these individuals. So that should also be part of my skills needed with the advanced clinical assessment, clinical documentation, crisis stabilization, treatment planning, all of that. But on top of that, the flip side, looking again at the self-compassion scale, what's also needed is that self-regulation because, again, I'm very low in that. And so I need to balance my empathy. While I extend that to others, I also need to extend that to myself. And so resources that I can use is the VA training modules. As a veteran that is looking into getting into that career, we have different facilities where we can kind of brush up on trainings like this to get our feet wet into the water to see if this is what we want to do. And so taking that into consideration, taking advantage of it is definitely something that I'll do. Peer supervision and mentorship. This is like using my field instructor and also people that I'm going to be working with in the future to my advantage as well as resources so that I can bounce off ideas and see myself from different point of views. And obviously using the NASW Code of Ethics and the CSWC resources is something that we actively use today. It's something I'm going to be continuously using for the rest of my career as long as I'm in the field. So determining actions to achieve these goals. So I have my academic and field actions. So I'm obviously seeking an internship with veterans. This is something that I'll be doing my second year in. I am only a first-time MSW student, first semester. Next semester is going to be second semester, but we're still in the first year. So I have some time, kind of. Part of it is also making sure that I take classes that kind of complement the things that I'm looking for. So elective classes in trauma, mental health, and clinical practice, which is basically all of what we are learning right now. And developing my portfolio is going into my intervention, my assessment, and veteran experience, and kind of combining those three. The professional development actions that I can take is completing VA or DoD online clinical trainings, which are available to me as a veteran, and attending workshops on CBT, EMDR, all of these other things, which I currently do and has been great for my personal development and also just understanding how these practices work. But again, there is that professional obligation to make sure I am good. So that's mainly what I use it for. I try to take off that clinical lens when I'm in these settings because that's not what you're there for. So self-compassion. Going back to the scale, something that I'm trying to reiterate is making sure that I actively practice self-compassion within myself. So I have established a 5 to 10 minute self-compassion exercise where I will write a compassionate letter to myself. And so this kind of helps me. I'm a very poetic person, and so even if I'm feeling terrible in the moment, if I wrote something that was really encouraging before this terrible thing happened and I come back to that, it really resets me and makes me feel good. So that's something I'm establishing. I'm challenging self-critical thoughts. This is something that I learned in CBT that's been really helpful and something that I'm going to keep continuously doing. Supervision, obviously, leaning in on my field instructor and other people to kind of see me from those different perspectives, like I said before, is definitely going to be helpful, but also in terms of just my self-compassion myself. If my partner is seeing that I'm not eating because I'm so upset that somebody cut me off, he's going to be like, hey, what's going on? And then I'm going to self-correct from there. And also just building that routine with connecting to others is definitely important. As I mentioned earlier, I tend to self-isolate, and that's not always a good thing. And I'm learning that. All right, going into frequency of these plans that I have established. So weekly, I'm going to do my self-compassion check-in. So this is going to help me with my emotional regulation. So it's reflective journaling. Again, I love to write, so this is something for me. Might not be for you, but this definitely helps as I get to reflect on things that, got me upset or something that actually happened that was good and kind of stick to that. Monthly, I'll review my progress with my field instructor. We technically do this like 2 times a week, but we are now establishing, while we still meet with each other weekly, going back and assessing the full month and understanding the full scope is definitely something that we need to take advantage of. So that's why I put that in monthly. Each semester, I'm obviously going to assess my progress towards the MSW competencies, and if I'm on track to graduating, I'm going to review my internship learning and clinical skill development. So identifying, veteran-related trainings and making sure that I expose myself to new opportunities is something that I'm going to be taking much pursuit of. And annually, I'm going to reassess that self-compassion scale. I think it'll be good to retake that in a year to see where I'm at as far as self-compassion and evaluating, licensure progress, clinical hour accumulation, all of these things. We have to be very meticulous about how we document everything. So, identifying strengths, resiliency factors, and strategies to ensure optimal outcomes. So, to enhance self-kindness, I have to reduce harsh inner criticism that drains me emotionally. I have to nurture connection. I need to not self-isolate when I'm feeling terrible. I should lean on my friends and family that are close to me. I have a really close circle, but they are very supportive, and so I need to take advantage of that. I got to use mindfulness intentionally, not just doing it for the heck of it, but making sure that I do it so that I can establish boundaries with my emotions and my client's trauma. Obviously, I don't want to take it home, but obviously I don't want to take out whatever I'm personally feeling onto them either. I need to seek supervision often and early. As we learned from Lee and Miller, this is definitely something that's going to keep you ethical, professional, especially with difficult cases, which will come up. It's not something that's avoidable. I've got to engage with veterans on a good basis. Obviously, I am a veteran, but staying in tune with the community is definitely something that is going to be relevant to me when I do become a professional. And hopefully, if I'm that involved in the community, some people will recognize me and they'll be like, oh my God, hey, I've noticed you, I've seen you. And that kind of builds that community engagement that we really focus on as social workers. And so that would be really cool. And I got to just practice compassion for myself and my clients on an equal basis, as I mentioned before. So I can do this with my high mindfulness, with my resiliency factors, and with my strengths. I just got to practice. So, in summary, my self-compassion scale serves as an early warning system. It highlights areas of self-judgment, isolation that could increase my risk for burnout if unaddressed. So, addressing these now will make me a more stable, grounded, and compassionate clinician in the future. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, and these are my references.